HumanX Ventures presents Inside the Coaching Mind. Terry Pettit coached the University of Nebraska's first national championship team in 1995 and put the state of Nebraska on a path to volleyball greatness. Now, Terry mentors coaches, writes books, and gives talks about leadership and team building to corporate and business audiences. Here's Coach Pettit to take us inside the coaching mind.
Thank you, David Young, and thank HumanX Ventures, an organization that recruits, develops, and mentors extraordinary coaches. HumanX Ventures, I don't know how many people know this. HumanX Ventures was involved in hiring PJ Fleck at the University of Minnesota, who has, in the 7 years he's been there, has dramatically changed the flight path of the Golden Gophers. And we have a guest today who has changed the flight path of the Pitt Panthers head coach, Dan Fisher, whose team has been ranked for several weeks at the #1 position. Welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind, Dan. It's wonderful to have you here.
Terry, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be talking with you.
Well, you know, I've followed your career, and there's some parallels with a lot of exceptional coaches. One, you're in your 12th season. It took 9 seasons from when you became the head coach to advance to a Final Four. You've been in the last 3, but some people think when somebody that's going to be a Hall of Fame coach, that happens overnight. It doesn't, unless you step into a program that's already at that level. It takes a lot of hard work. I noticed when you began that you recruited smaller attackers, not deliberately, but
Yep.
at that time you couldn't get maybe somebody that was interested in Penn State, but they all had great arms. So you created a brand, and I think that's critical to a program. You know, we look at North Carolina basketball when Roy Williams was the head coach, and everybody knew what they did. They ran the floor. I think Penn State, when Coach Rose was there, had a brand. I think John Cook has a brand. I think John Dunning had a brand, and Pitt has a brand. The other thing that I really like about your background is that you've leveraged all of your experiences. You were born in Santa Barbara and lived in Santa Barbara. Your dad was a physical therapist. I think at one time he may have worked for Laszlo
That's right.
Karai. You were a beach player, grew up, you say that you weren't a very good athlete. That I don't quite believe that. People that aren't great athletes don't go on and play college and play professionally. One thing I'm a little confused about, I know that you were a setter, but when you played in college, were you primarily an attacker?
So I was a setter when I was a freshman in high school, and then I was 5'10", and then a year and a half later I was 6'5" and a half, and I still, back then, the opposite was the second setter.
Right.
So I would set in practice, but I was primarily an opposite in high school. And then I went to the University of Hawaii. I played for Mike Wilton, and he recruited me as an opposite. And I let him know I wanted to set, but he thought I was too slow, and which I was. And so when I transferred to Cal State Northridge, I played for John Price, and John just made me a setter. And so from then on, and I was part of that program that got cut, so I ended up going to UOP. But I set for the next 3 years, and then when my short time with the national team, I was a setter, and then for the 5 years I played in Europe, I was a setter.
Well, the fact that you played in 3 college programs and played for different teams in Europe, I think that's an advantage because you undoubtedly had to adapt to different
Yep.
coaches. You were around different people. You also were an assistant coach at several programs, an assistant coach at Pacific, and I know that you ran into Glenn Albaugh there. I met Glenn. Tell us who Glenn is, or Glenn
Yeah.
was.
So Glenn, so I played at 2 years at UOP under Joe Wortman, and then I went back and I coached 3 years with the men there. So when I was a player, John Denning was the head coach, and so I guess I got Terry Liskevich would stop by at times, and so I worked John's camps, so I was kind of familiar with their program. And then when I went back and so Glenn Alba was the golf coach at that time. So I didn't really interact much with Glenn, but it's a small school. So, I knew him. And then when I came back to coach with the men, and I also got my master's at that time, Glenn was retired, but he still mentored all the coaches at UOP. And so I didn't realize what a gold mine I had. I just assumed that being mentored as a young coach was part of every athletic department's thing. So we would have monthly roundtables. Sometimes they'd be all coaches. Sometimes they'd be assistant coaches only. Sometimes he'd bring in a speaker. So Glenn Albaugh was a mentor. One of his best friends was Bill Walsh. So he'd bring in Bill Walsh, or he'd bring in John Dunning, or he'd bring in Pete Carroll. Glenn was a mentor for Pete Carroll and just to really, he was a sports psychologist for pro golfers, and he wrote a really neat book, and we would just have really thoughtful discussions and assignments, and I just like I said, I assumed that was the norm, that you could have the same mentor as Pete Carroll, like that.
Well, it isn't even the norm to have a mentor. I played that role for 3 years at Nebraska and ran around. And so you've got all these resources and money tied up in could be 65 coaches, and nobody's working to help them get better. To me, it's astounding. Now, I assume you have someone at Pitt that's playing that role today.
In the way that he did it, no. But there is, I think that was really unique to him. Our team works with a very good sports psychologist. Some universities have a full-time sports psychologist that fills that void a little bit. But it was just really, I'm really grateful, I guess, just to have had that. And when you talk about mentoring, I guess, I don't feel like I've had one mentor. I think I've had just at different phases in my life. But I guess starting my coaching career there, Joe Wortman was my boss, and he was a teacher by training. So I feel like, and he was just a great guy and role model. And so I think I really feel like I learned how to lesson plan from him, like how to, and then, I think I was influenced a lot by Glenn Albaugh. I think, and then early in my career, I got to be an assistant coach for the World University Games with Alan Knipe. And I really feel like I learned a lot from him. And then
Dan, you were preparing to be a teacher yourself, right?
Well, I thought that I would either be a teacher or a counselor. And then probably at some point when I was playing in Europe, I thought, hey, maybe I'll try coaching, because I love my experience. I loved my coaches, and they were big influences on me. And and so I thought maybe teaching, counseling, there's obviously a huge component of that in coaching. So that was attractive, but that was kind of my fallback plan. Yeah.
Well, I'm an advocate. I think a lot of the very best coaches really have a background in at some point they were on a path to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
John Cook was going to be a geography teacher,
Right.
and I think Russ Rose was going to be a teacher, and John Dunning was a math teacher. And I think your vision is a little bit broader than if you were always going to be a coach. Your undergraduate degree is in sociology. Your graduate
Mm-hmm.
degree is in sports science. Tell me how
Don't
your
forget
back.
about my minor in religious studies.
Well, I have that as well. Enough to know that I shouldn't go into the ministry. Uh, but so I mean, it's kind of a liberal arts background.
Yeah.
Uh, how does that frame your coaching? And I don't necessarily mean in-game coaching, but how does it frame your philosophy of what you want to have happen to the people
Yeah.
you work with?
I think I definitely do have what I would consider like a historic, true liberal arts background. And I think I've always been curious. So I don't think I can separate it from my time living in Europe for 5 years, because I think I've always been curious about other cultures and other people, and then I had the experience of living abroad, which is classically what it meant to be educated, right? It meant that you had lived abroad and understood other cultures, and I was there, pre cell phone, or at least I think my third year I had a cell phone, and the first couple years I remember going to internet cafes to write emails, and so I went native, right? I was like the last generation, probably. I think the last year I did have a laptop, but the group right after me went over with their laptops and had video games, and but when I didn't have anything to do, I would I'd go to a coffee shop or hang out with a friend, or go to the library. So I lived in Spain for 3 years. I still speak decent Spanish, and so I just think I truly know what it's like to be away and be on your own, and I know that for me, when I was abroad, my team was my family and my support network, and so I've always tried to keep that in mind. With
Yeah, the other side of this, let's say that you'd been a great international setter and an Olympian.
Mhm.
You might not be as good a coach, because people that end up doing that for 15 years and then enter coaching are competing against other people who've been coaching for 15 years. But you got back into it after 5 years, and you've had wonderful experiences to lead you to Pitt. I believe Steve Peterson was the AD, and a lot of our listeners
That's right.
are familiar with him because he was the Nebraska AD, and he hired you in 2013. What was he looking for? What did he say?
Well, yeah, I think we can't probably skip over Mike Hebert, because
Right.
I moved around men's volleyball, women's volleyball, and then got my first chance to be a head coach at Concordia University, Irvine, and thought I'd be there. I never had any dreams to be really. I thought I'd be a D2 coach, or I wanted to be a head coach, but it was never like I didn't. I didn't know much about the women's game. I didn't really know what Power Five teams were. I was kind of in my men's volleyball world, and then I got asked by, I'd done some stuff on the men's side, but I got asked to be an assistant coach by Hugh. Asked me because someone dropped out, and it was the 2012 Pan Am Cup, And so it was a group of girls that you'd probably know pretty well. I think Nancy Metcalf was on that team. But it was some younger girls like Carly Lloyd, Alicia Glass, that were trying to get in for the next quad. And then it was a group of women that had maybe already been in the Olympics and found out they weren't going. So it was not an easy assignment. But we ended up making the best of it and winning the Pan Am Cup. And one of the assistants, or a head delegate, was Mike Hebert. And so he kind of pulled me aside at the end and said, "Hey, I think you got a bright future. If you ever want to leave the NAIA, let me know." And then that following season, we won the NAIA National Championship. And Mike Hebert called me up and said, "Hey, what do you think about Pittsburgh?" And so I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it." And so Mike could kind of talk to me, and he said, "I know you're living in San Juan Capistrano, and you're in your garage, and you're looking at your surfboards, and you're like, yeah, the way he would kind of, weave a yarn." And so he was hired by Steve Peterson to put together a candidate pool, and so he was pretty influential, and he obviously is the former coach at Pitt and was influential on selling my wife and I on it, and telling Steve that he thought I could do a good job, and we're moving into the ACC, and so I don't know Steve's full perspective. I know that Steve obviously knew what big time volleyball looked like, and Steve, off the record, would share with me that like volleyball was his favorite, women's sport, and I think Steve knew that we were moving from the Big East into the ACC, and it was going to be tougher, and gave me a chance. So,
yeah, that's a very interesting story. Mike, I was coaching at a junior college when Mike was at Pitt, and I didn't know him, and he called me up and was recruiting our setter, Priscilla Everett, to come to Pitt. And then I got the Nebraska job and took her with me to Nebraska. But Mike and I were great friends, and he was a very collaborative person. Had any coaching staff he was on, if you were on it with him, you were in charge of something, and I certainly appreciated that aspect. A couple weeks ago in October, you played one of the most interesting volleyball matches I've ever seen against the University of Louisville. And I have to think that both Louisville and Pitt benefited a tremendous deal from having each other over these last 10 years. They kind of separated themselves in terms of their consistently excellent play. But it's hard to do that if you don't have the worthy opponent. Would you agree with that assessment?
I think so. It's hard because, maybe they have a different perspective, but it was never on my mind to like, hey, we got to just be better than Louisville. It was just, we wanted to be the best we could. And that was kind of, it became pretty clear about whatever it was when, especially when Danny came in, and that, they were going to be our biggest challenge in the league. And,
I don't necessarily mean.
So I think, I know what you're saying. I think like we were trying to be the best we could be, the best in the league. And then we kind of realized at some point, hey, being better than Louisville means you're pretty much as good as anyone. Like that, you can.
Well, but if you aren't there or Louisville isn't there, you're not playing in conference a team that's similar to a team that you're going to meet in a regional final or a team in a Final Four. And
I agree, and I'd also say that I think both of us. I'd like to say we were the first to do it. You touched on it. Like both of us kind of came in with a little different style. Like we came in and we didn't tip a whole lot. We took big rips. We played pretty fast. And then they came in, they were kind of doing the same thing. They weren't tipping a lot. They were playing fast. And at that time, there was a lot of Big Ten teams playing really slow and tipping a lot. And so we not only were good and competitive, I think we kind of had a little, people were noticing, hey, there's something different going on there. They had like shorter players that were really athletic. And so I think there was the competition was good, but I also think there was a little style difference that people were going, hey, something's going on in the ACC.
Yeah. Your style during a match is different. When I look at Danny, it's like she got out of an elevator and stepped into the Christmas section, and it's just kind of in wonder about what's going on. And I hope you take this right, but sometimes do you know what a floor walker was? Yeah, a floor walker was this guy that you used to see in department stores that would walk around to see if anybody's stealing anything.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
But that match, two great teams, two teams that are on paths to perhaps return to the Final Four. It was electric, and you were in the. I believe you played that match in the Peterson Center, so you had a large crowd there. It went 5 sets. The 5th set was close. When you play another really strong team, and maybe every team, how many hours does the staff spend preparing for a match like that before you even get to practice?
Total staff hours. Good question.
Well, or just
20, 30, 40. I don't know. Because we have a lot for a game like that.
Yeah, and a lot more than fans would understand. That you've looked at every player, every pass they've made, what they do in situations when the opposing coaches call a timeout. When you two play each other, how often does the other side do something that they haven't seen?
Well, this time was one of them. I thought they came in and did 3 things specifically that I don't want to talk about on air, but they did 3 things that was obvious, like that they had practiced and they had seen, that were based on, and they all 3 of them worked. So we were in game going, okay, like we haven't seen them do that.
Well, and you did too. I mean, you've got a wonderful team, three extraordinary players, and everybody on the team is extraordinary. But you've got pin hitters that are playing 6 rotations. You've got perhaps the most fierce back row attacker in college volleyball. I've always loved Fairbanks, your setter.
Yep.
And initially she was also an attacker, so she moved from setting in a 6-2 to setting in a 5-1. Let's begin there. How was that transition? How is that different when that happens with the setter?
Well, I think I was pretty locked into, in women's volleyball, especially, running a 6-2 if you had 2 good setters, in the same way you saw our national team go into the double substitution often in the Olympics. If you can have a stronger block and 3 front row attackers, and you don't, and you're not taking a big drop in your setting, then it makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of where we were for a while as a program. We had some strong right sides, Chinaza Inde, but she wasn't just a beastly back row attacker. And so then once we got Courtney Bizzario, we were kind of doing a 6-2, and then it just became obvious, like, this girl is a really consistent D-ball hitter. And Rachel kept improving as a setter. So I would just say she was just a good athlete, a winner, an all-around player, a good defender, a good server. And then she started becoming more of a true setter. And then we also had the right side hitter to do it. And then fast forward to last year, we bring in Olivia Babcock, who I, in my mind, thought, she's a freshman, she's raw, she's going to be a 3 rotation player her first year. And she just was more ready to go and got better faster than I was predicting. So then we found ourselves right back in a 5-1.
Yeah. Well, that certainly is an interesting transition. So you're in this match and it goes 4.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 5th set, Dan, I thought you reminded me of a basketball coach in that match in this respect. Basketball coaches, you can't go out there and just play 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You need breaks. But there were times when you pulled Fairbanks and your right side player out for a couple plays. Yeah, Babcock, and then put them back in. And then, Lord have mercy, you play the 5th set with your second setter. And man, that took a lot of guts. I'm guessing that was more of a feel decision, or is somebody showing you something statistically that says this is a move you need to make? I can't believe that was how that decision was made. Talk us through that.
Yeah, well, all of those things. But in game, ultimately, it has to be feel, right? You don't just,
Right.
There's no plan. You plan to play well, and but at any rate, our second right side, Blair Bayless, has been, was on the U21 team last year. And our setter is, these aren't just any old players, right? Our backup setter is Turkish gal Nisa, who's very, very good, and was a starter last year for Texas A&M, and we had an injury over the summer to our backup setter, and so I just went looking, and Nisa had a shoulder surgery and had not played in about 8 months, and I watched a bunch of video, got her on the phone, and said, "Hey, what do you think? Can we get that shoulder strong, and can we get you in shape by November, December?" And she said, "Yeah, I think I can do it." And so she is a very, very good setter. So, but to that decision, Louisville had a really, De Beer was the matchup against Rachel Fairbanks was very good for De Beer, and so we weren't putting a lot of defensive pressure on those rows. And so I don't have the best memory, but I think I made the switch in set 2, and it almost worked. We got to 24. We were down big. And
that's correct.
And I really wanted it to work because like, as a coach, half the time, when you're playing against a team, they start in a 5-1, they go to a 6-2, it never works, and then they go back to the 5-1, and so it's like the coach tries something, doesn't work, and so you don't want to be the coach that just you try one thing, it doesn't work, you try something else, it doesn't work. So, but it gave us a lift, and it made our defense a little better, and so yeah, I don't think that's our plan, but I think it was also a good confidence boost going into for Blair and Nisa to know that they can come in and make a difference.
Yeah. Well, it takes a lot of guts to make a move like that, and there are some other teams that I think Nebraska has an extraordinary backup setter, a great blocker.
Yeah.
But so there are other teams that could make it. But I know in the past you've talked about one of your strengths being creativity. Certainly that was a very creative move, and a move that ultimately paid off. When a coach makes a decision like that, do you have some work to do with the player who didn't play in the fifth set? I mean, does she need some reassurance, or does she understand on an emotional level why she was removed and the other player played?
Uh, Not with Rachel and Olivia, because I mean, they're such great teammates and competitors. And then I think also, I would hope not with anyone against a team like Louisville, that there's a level of like, hey, we don't care how we win. We just, this is, we want, like, we want to, so we want to win. And so, I don't think so with those two. But I think with the stakes are high at this point with our team, as they are with, on a national team or on any top program, that our players are really good and they want to play. And so as a coach, when you make a
Yeah,
it needs to work, right? And like, you can't just like, or else there, I think there's truth in what you're saying. You can't just make decisions and they don't work.
well, I'm curious, during the match, what are your assistants doing? What are their roles during the match? And how much do you talk with them in timeouts, or your decision about who to go with in the fifth set? Do you bounce that off them? A lot of people that are listening to us are coaches, but some, so what are they doing?
So I have an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator, and I still believe that I like them doing their shot charts by hand. A lot of programs I see now have like 5 coaches on the bench doing nothing, and I'm like, I guess it's like everyone's a field coach now. I go, but I just remember I was a kind of I mean, I did both roles at some point, but I just felt like when I was charting defense, I would get so locked in on what they were doing. So I want my assistants, to have one really locked in on their defense and one locked in on our offense. And then I have, our ops person is our our data, like our coding and doing volley station. And then my other assistant is pretty heavy into serve and pass. And also I try to make sure that he is seeing what our back row and their back row is doing. So I just don't want a whole staff that's ball watching or watching the net. I think if you don't have clear roles, everyone just, you can do a whole match and not really know where another team's back row is standing, because everyone's, eyes are on the.
Well, because of the camera angle, a lot of times these cameras aren't quite where they could be. They put them right on the net, and so I can see you, but I couldn't see the assistant, so I couldn't tell. Some teams will have a head coach who's calling out commits, or flashing signals. If you're doing it, you've got a code that I can't recognize. I mean, you personally. So
Yeah.
somebody else communicating with the players?
So Coach Callan, we do it less than we used to. I used to be pretty active in calling traps and commits, and but with someone like a middle blocker like Bree Kelly, she's pretty good at making decisions in game. And then with a setter like Rachel, there's times where I will tell her who to set still, but she's got a great sense of who the hot hitters are and what the matchups are. And so it's probably more of, me letting her know when I don't like something. And so then her having to deal with that, and um, but she's just got such a great feel for the game. So we're trying to train our, ultimately, like, I think, yes, we do see the game better as coaches. If we didn't, why would we have coaches? So there are times that we get pretty active and, what we want, matchups we want, or, plays we want to run. But ultimately, we're trying to train our players in a way in the practice gym and throughout the season that they can make good decisions on their own.
Tori Stafford, Olivia Babcock. I know you've worked with U21 teams and things. Had you seen them or coached them on USA junior teams?
No, I mean, they were both, committed when they were before that age group. And so, but I certainly, I'm one of the 50 regional scouts, and when Karcher and Virtue, or I'd certainly put a recommendation in that both of them should be considered in that list. I think Jamie Morrison coached, I think he coached the U19 team that year.
Well, they're both, Stafford. I've got this hitting 376. Is that possible for
her consistency? I think the last couple, she's had 3 weeks where she's really disappointed in herself, and I think the lowest weekend total was hitting 250. So, yeah. I mean, she's just been so consistent this year, and Olivia gets a lot of recognition. I think rightly so, because she's fantastic, but I think also part of it is she jump serves and she hits D balls, right? And so that's something that is not seen a lot in women's volleyball, but I couldn't tell you who's more valuable, her or Tori. Tori carries such a big load and is so consistent, and is just a great spirit on the court too. Really is a great competitor, a joyful player. I mean, I don't know what value you can put on someone that is a joyful player. Like she is, people want to be her teammate. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about Tori.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that Babcock does, you've got 3 players averaging over 1.10 blocks per set. Mm-hmm. And that's the statistic that we see on national championship teams. They frequently have the third blocker. Yeah. You're right about Babcock. It's kind of like somebody's breaking into a house and they climb over the fence, and all of a sudden a German Shepherd comes running out the door. So I know that when I was coaching and we played against an extraordinary server, there can be a tendency for a team to be thinking about her even when she's not serving, like, oh, she's going to be coming around here soon, and there's pressure to side out. When you have a server that's serving with Babcock's intensity, it's not a pass, it's a dig, and you hope to just get beneath the ball and in front of it. So I'm curious, with her, do you set goals in terms of, I mean, there's several different ways of measuring serve. One would be percent of serves in. Another would be ace to error ratio. A third would be points per rotation. And it might vary with different servers. With her, is there a standard that you would like her to be at?
Well, we look at all of it. I think generally we like to be with our floaters 9 out of 10 in, and we want the opponent pass to be below a 2. Like these are things we look at, and then we also look at point scoring by row, but that gets a little skewed because of who the blockers are. So with Olivia, we're probably a little bit more in the 5 out of 6 range with the jump spinner. Mm-hmm. but we also, we look at overall point scoring. And so, it's taken me, it's hard for me because I was, I was a jump server in college. In my last 3 years, I was always top 10 in aces. I made a ton of errors in men's volleyball. But in women's volleyball, the net being lower, the jump float is so effective. So it is so hard for me at times to, to ride the wave with Olivia when she has a couple sets where it's not working, knowing that a good jump float would probably have scored us more points. But then at any moment, she totally changes a set. You're kind of in this, it's 5-5, then it's 8-8, then it's 10-10, and she goes back, and all of a sudden it's 17-11, and you're like, oh, that's a different game.
Right.
So you're right. It just changes the, kind of the, I guess, the emotions of the set.
Right. It also changes the preparation of the opponent.
Yeah.
Everybody you face has to go find somebody probably to jump serve off a box and spend a third of their practice hoping that a run doesn't happen there.
Right.
Well, it appears to me that you've got every ingredient you need. You're statistically, you're really dominating NCAA statistics. I mean, your team's hitting 336. Your opponents are hitting 110. I don't know. Penn State may have had a season that may be in that area, but usually you don't see the gap that's there. 200 points. So I saw by one standard, you had 4 of the top 10 servers in the country. And I looked at your stats, and certainly you have 3 that are averaging above 0.4 aces per set. Your blocking is exceptional. Your defense is exceptional. Mm-hmm. You have two setters. So you have all the pieces. And yet, as moving forward, you've positioned yourself to, barring injury and divine intervention, you've positioned yourself to host a regional. But you've got that match at Louisville coming up at the end of the season. And they have players that would fit well on the Pitt roster. I mean, DeBeer has been one of my favorite players for forever. She doesn't take a second off. She
really doesn't.
Has she kept you awake a few nights?
No, not kept me awake, but she was. I remember when you're right. She would fit well with the roster, and she was, in fact, when she committed to Louisville, I remember kind of giving my recruiting coordinator a hard time. I go, "That's the kind of player we need." That's because there was a thought at the time that, like, maybe like that's a player we could get because a Big Ten school would, would get the taller player. And of course now, like, the ACC is, we're getting the top players in the country, but at that time it seemed like, hey, maybe we need to get someone that's 5'11" and springy, or so yeah, you're absolutely right that you just like the springy shorter player with ball control that cracks it is something that I like. But I just have always, we don't always get a chance to talk to players like back in the day on other teams, but I just really have a lot of respect for her, and mostly just her competitive spirit.
Yeah. She would could be a character in High Noon. When that gang rides into town on the train, it's wonderful to see. Looking forward, as I have a theory that at the beginning of November, about 80% of teams start to make a U-turn, and they just kind of hold on. that there's just a few teams, a few percentage that keep getting better. What would you like to see from your team? Where would you like to see you get better?
Well, I think there is, it's probably quite individual at this point. I mean, we do have one rotation. I don't want to say which one it is, that our point scoring hasn't been that great. So we want to be a team that is great offensively and defensively in every row.
But Dan, you just hinted at something that I think is critical. You said it's individual. Yeah. And to me, teams don't just get better. They get better when when an individual gets a little better and takes charge of something. Is that fair to say?
That's right. Yeah. So you're looking at a hitter and you're saying, hey, you're more comfortable hitting cross court in this zone. Hey, can we, then that's your best shot, and that's still going to be your best shot, but we know they're going to block your cross. Can we sting them a few times line and get them thinking, or the reverse, or can we, can someone that's out of system get a little bit better at maybe recycling it off the block or wiping out, or just a few more tricks that we have, but we maybe when we get stressed we don't use them enough. We just kind of hit it as hard as we can. Can we be a little bit better at more disciplined at covering? I think that's just it's been such a we have this goal of being, I'll tell you this, we want to be the best small ball team in the country. Okay, so what does that mean to me? That means we're the best covering team, the best non-setter setting team. We joust and play it off the block or play it off the net or all these weird plays. We want to be the team that is the most calm when it gets chaotic. And so we try to train chaotically. We make it a priority, but no matter how much we train it, it just seems like all of a sudden we're going to have a match and I'm going to pull up like us at hitter contact and someone's not going to be covering. So you're going to have this video session, or they're going to be covering like what we call fake covering. They're going to be like in a covering posture, but you can tell they're on their heels and they're not really expecting the ball. Like a phony cover. So, those are the kind of things we talk about. We like individually getting better, and then like, hey, are we going to be the team that in the Elite Eight at 24 all is really calm on this, on this chaotic play that steps in and puts in a perfect ball? Or are we going to freak out and set it off the net and wide, and our hitter is going to be falling backwards and not know where the block is?
Yeah, I know you've got a couple young kids. I'm guessing they come to matches. Are they ever in practice?
Rarely in like practice, but they are around the program a lot. And my daughter's 12 now, and she's playing volleyball, and I failed miserably to get her to do another sport. I didn't know I was a bad parent. I didn't know that when you tell your kid not to do something, that they're they're obviously going to do it. So be careful what you tell your kids not to do.
So you never got her ice skates for Christmas?
She does have ice skates. So we are in Pittsburgh. So, but last few years they're both pretty good skiers. We're more of a ski family than an ice skate family at this point. But we're in Pittsburgh, so everyone skates here, and she'll go to birthday parties and stuff at the rink. And
well, Dan, it's been wonderful having you here. I wish you good health as you move toward the end of the season. I have great admiration for what you've built there, and volleyball couldn't be better than it is right now, and I hope people realize that. I also want to thank Human X Ventures. Without Human X,
do I get a chance to ask you any questions?
Sure, you can ask me one question.
Okay, what's your advice to our team? You've seen us play. You've seen us be close the last couple years. I mean, we're we're trying to do what you've done.
Well, my advice, I don't know that I have an advice to your team. I would say this: everybody feels, every coach I know feels the intensity, sometimes the anxiety that you feel. But I also know that, or I believe that it's kind of like a play, and we all have roles, and head coaches have roles. And anything that I could do as a head coach to not create more pressure for my team during important matches, I thought was critical. You know, Russ used to kind of scribble on a notepad. I don't think what he was writing was important. I think it was a way for him to deflect his energy. John Dunning, you know, kind of looked puzzled, but very, very quiet.
With this little clap.
Yeah, his little clap. John Cook is on the bench because of this. He still kind of looks like the painting Guernica. Did you ever see Picasso?
Oh, yeah.
He can kind of look like that on the bench, but he's 30 feet from it. So
I would not have looked at John Cook and ever thought Guernica until now. But
well, remember we both have liberal arts educations. So no, I would say that that's it. That I really one of the things I really admire about Danny is her ability to basically it's her countenance during the match. All of us have strengths. All of us have areas that we're vulnerable at. We begin by hiring people, surrounding ourselves with collaborative talents. You've obviously done that. You wouldn't be where you're at. So I would anticipate that Pitt is going to be very successful. I hope. I don't know, you know, many, many years ago, I was on an NCAA committee when I was coaching that was involved in ranking teams and things. But, you know, I think the basketball committee has a little bit more sense that if Duke and North Carolina are in the tournament, they don't put them in the same regional to meet each other, you know.
Yep.
They don't just follow the numbers exactly. And, you know, I think as looking ahead here, I would be disappointed if Louisville and Pitt were in the same regional or met each other too soon. I would be disappointed if Nebraska and Penn State or Wisconsin, if that happened. I just think you want to find out, you know, some of these teams haven't met, and you don't want the second best team to lose too soon. I'm sure nobody will pay attention to that, because my feeling is in women's volleyball, they have a formula and sometimes they get locked in. They do a great job most of the time, but you know, some years they have 4 teams in from a conference, and a team has beaten the best team in the country, and they're not in the tournament. I don't think you're going to have that problem, and you're going to play if you know, if you're fortunate enough to get there, you're going to play in a place you've played before. I mean, you're comfortable with Louisville, and so you know, I think it has to be potential. When you were describing a team that's comfortable under pressure, Creighton is comfortable under pressure. They're not like Pitt in a lot of ways. They don't hit the ball as hard, but they figure out ways to handle the best points at the right time. They don't have the advantage of playing Pitt's competition, but it is a team that I could see advancing to the Final Four. I'm real eager to see Penn State only plays Wisconsin once. They only play Nebraska once. But I'm eager to see that type of matchup, to see where they're at. I think she's done a wonderful job. That team was kind of program was kind of gutted when Coach Rose retired, and she's done a remarkable job, I think. They also have what I think is an extraordinary setter. Her father used to come to practice and hit on the other side of the net, and then he went on to play at Ball State. So it's a very interconnected world, and I'm pleased to know you and wish you well. And again, I want to go back and thank Human X Ventures. Without them, we can't do this. Our next guest, sometime in the next couple of weeks, is going to be Brad Ott, who is, among other things, who's my physical therapist, but has a son who's trying his hand at professional golf, a daughter who played at soccer at Iowa State. If you haven't voted, vote, and we'll hope for good things. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.
Inside the Coaching Mind is presented by Human X Ventures and is pleased to be a part of the Learfield Varsity Podcast Network. If you're on Facebook, look for the Inside the Coaching Mind group and join a vibrant discussion of volleyball and leadership. TerryPettit.com is where you'll find Terry's books, writings, and downloads, as well as subscription links for all your podcast apps.